In a mansion worth over $100 million in Atlanta, a billionaire sat alone at a table meant for 20 people. No guests, no laughter, no family, just silence that felt heavier than the walls around him. The only sound was the soft echo of a fork touching an empty plate, repeating in a space designed for celebration but now filled with absence. That man was Malcolm Hayes, a self-made billionaire known across America as the king of black wealth, a man whose face once symbolized success, power, and achievement. Yet in this moment, none of that mattered. The trophies, the companies, the headlines, the private jets, all of it sat outside that dining room like it belonged to someone else's life. Because inside, Malcolm wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man sitting with the weight of everything he sacrificed to get here. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. And as Malcolm sat there, staring at food he barely touched, his mind drifted into places he had avoided for years. Back to the beginning. Back to the streets of Chicago where nothing was guaranteed except struggle, and where a young boy once promised himself he would never be powerless again. That boy grew into a man who built an empire from nothing, but somewhere along the way, the empire stopped feeling like victory. It started feeling like distance. Distance from people. Distance from peace. Distance from the version of himself who once believed success would finally make everything right. How does a man who is everything end up having nothing? The answer doesn't begin in that mansion in Atlanta. It begins years earlier, in a small apartment in Chicago, where Malcolm Hayes first learned what it meant to want more than life was willing to give. Was Malcolm Hayes successful, or was he just rich and empty? Because from the outside, his life looked like the definition of success. The kind people dream about when they are young and struggling. A man who rose from nothing in Chicago to becoming one of the most powerful black billionaires in America. His empire stretched across tech companies, luxury real estate, hotels, and investments that shaped entire industries. But behind that empire, something very different existed. There was no wife waiting for him at home. No children calling his name when he walked through the door. No real friends sitting beside him when the cameras were off and the business deals were done. Only money. And a growing emptiness he could not explain no matter how many achievements he added to his name. The world saw a king. But Malcolm Hayes often felt like a man standing in a room full of applause that meant nothing when he turned around and found no one there. And the real question begins to form here. What did Malcolm Hayes lose to become this rich? And why did his own success start to feel like it was slowly taking pieces of him he never knew he would miss? Because sometimes, the things we chase the hardest are the same things that quietly take everything else away from us without warning. Malcolm Hayes was born in poverty in Chicago, in a neighborhood where opportunities were rare and survival was the main focus of every day. He was raised by a struggling single mother, Denise Hayes, a woman who worked 3 different jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. The environment around him was harsh, filled with broken systems, limited chances, and constant reminders that people like him were not expected to rise far. He grew up facing humiliation, rejection, and the kind of silence that comes when the world stops believing in your potential before you even get a chance to prove it. Denise Hayes was the only steady force in his life. She believed in discipline, faith, and sacrifice, even when life gave her no reason to smile. She used to tell him, "Son, money is important, but don't become so rich that your heart becomes poor." At the time, Malcolm barely understood what she meant. To him, poverty was not just lack of money, it was embarrassment. It was being ignored. It was being looked through like he didn't matter. So while his mother spoke about heart and values, Malcolm was already thinking about escape. But Malcolm Hayes didn't listen to those warnings. He wanted something else entirely. He wanted revenge against poverty. He wanted respect in rooms where people once doubted him. He wanted power that no one could take away from him again. And in his mind, there was only one way to achieve that. So he made a promise to himself, one that would shape everything that came after. One day, I'll become so rich nobody will ever look down on me again. And unlike many childhood promises, Malcolm Hayes followed through. What followed was a rise that few people ever experience. He built a tech empire from nothing, starting with ideas that people once laughed at. Then came real estate domination, where he began buying properties across cities, and turning them into high-value assets. From there, the growth became explosive. His valuation reached billions. His name became known in boardrooms, news headlines, and financial magazines. He was no longer just Malcolm from Chicago. He was now the king of black wealth, a symbol of success, ambition, and transformation. But even as his empire expanded, something else began to change quietly in the background. The higher he climbed, the further he drifted from the life that once shaped him. He stopped visiting family. Old friends stopped receiving his calls. Conversations that once meant everything to him became brief replies or unanswered messages. Slowly, Malcolm Hayes became emotionally distant, replacing human connection with meetings, contracts, and business deals that never ended. Success was growing, but his humanity was shrinking in ways he did not fully recognize at first. The man who once shared dreams with people on the same broken streets now lived in a world where every relationship had a purpose and every interaction had a price. And without realizing it, Malcolm Hayes was beginning to build an empire that had everything money could buy, except the one thing he never thought he would lose along the way. One cold night in New York City, Malcolm Hayes received a call that he almost ignored. He was deep inside a high-level meeting, surrounded by executives, investors, and flashing screens filled with numbers that represented millions moving in real time. His phone lit up once, then twice, then stopped. The name on the screen was Denise Hayes, his mother. For a brief second, something inside him hesitated. But then he looked at the room, the deal in front of him, the pressure of everything he had built, and he chose not to answer. The meeting continued. The empire continued. Life, in his world, did not pause for personal calls. 2 days later, everything stopped. His mother was gone. There was no long warning, no second chance, no final conversation, just silence where her voice used to be. The woman who once worked 3 jobs to raise him, who once told him to protect his heart, was no longer there to repeat those words again. And now, for the first time in years, Malcolm Hayes was forced to face something that no amount of money could delay or negotiate away. The funeral came quickly, but Malcolm Hayes arrived late. Not because he didn't care, but because he had spent so long believing there would always be more time. More time to call back. More time to visit. More time to fix what had been slowly breaking between them. When he finally arrived, the room was already heavy with grief. People looked at him expecting emotion, expecting collapse, expecting something visible. But Malcolm Hayes stood still. No tears in public. No words. Just a man holding everything inside him like it might fall apart if he let even a piece of it show. But inside, something had already cracked forever. That night, Malcolm Hayes returned to his mansion in silence. The same mansion that once represented success now felt unfamiliar. The hallways felt longer. The rooms felt colder. And when he walked into the dining area, something hit him that he had never truly noticed before. The table was built for 20 people. 20 chairs. 20 places meant for life, conversation, and connection. But there was only one person there. Only him. And in that moment, Malcolm Hayes realized something that shook him deeper than any business loss ever could. He had everything he spent his life chasing, everything the world defined as success, everything money could build or buy, but there was no one left to share it with. And that was the moment Malcolm Hayes began to change. But not in the way the world expected. Days turned into weeks, and for Malcolm Hayes, something inside him no longer responded the way it used to. The phone still rang with business calls. The meetings still filled calendars that once defined his identity. The empire still stood strong, still growing, still expanding across industries and markets. But Malcolm Hayes was no longer moving with the same hunger. The ambition that once drove him to prove everyone wrong had started to feel distant. Instead, there was something else growing quietly in its place. A question he could no longer ignore. What was all of this actually for? Malcolm Hayes stopped chasing business the way he used to. The urgency faded. The excitement disappeared. And in its place, he began chasing something he had ignored for most of his adult life. Meaning, not wealth, not expansion, not recognition. Something deeper that money had never been able to give him, no matter how much he accumulated. Without telling anyone in his inner circle, Malcolm Hayes made a decision that surprised even those closest to him. He returned to Chicago, not as the billionaire the world knew, but as a man going back to the place where everything began. The streets of his childhood were still there, unchanged in ways that felt both familiar and painful. Broken sidewalks that had never been repaired. Struggling families still trying to survive day by day. Forgotten dreams still sitting quietly in the corners of neighborhoods that the world had moved on from. And then, something unexpected happened. An old barber recognized him. The shop was small, worn by time, filled with the sound of clippers and quiet conversations. Malcolm Hayes almost walked past it, but the voice from inside stopped him. "Malcolm? Denise's son." He turned. The barber looked at him carefully, as if trying to match the man in front of him with the boy he once knew. Then he said something that stayed with Malcolm Hayes longer than any headline, any deal, any achievement he had ever received. "Your mother was proud of your success, but she missed her son." Those words did not just reach him. They broke through everything he had built around himself. Because in that moment, Malcolm Hayes understood something painful and undeniable. He had spent years becoming everything the world admired, but in doing so, he had slowly become less of what his mother actually needed. That sentence destroyed him more than any business failure ever could. And from that point forward, Malcolm Hayes made a decision that shifted the entire direction of his life. Instead of buying another mansion, expanding another portfolio, or adding another company to his name, he began investing millions into rebuilding the neighborhood that raised him. But this time, it was different. It was not about image. It was not about headlines. It was about return. He created free schools where children could learn without fear of cost. He built scholarship programs for students who thought education was out of reach. He funded housing projects for families struggling to stay afloat. He established youth centers where young boys could find guidance instead of getting lost in silence. And he created business funding opportunities for Black families who were often shut out of systems that controlled wealth. But this time, Malcolm Hayes didn't just write checks and disappear into meetings and reports. He showed up. He stood there. He listened. He spoke. He stayed. He spoke to young boys growing up without fathers. He helped struggling mothers trying to hold families together. He sat with teenagers who had no hope left in their eyes, trying to remind them that their story was not finished yet. And slowly, something began to change in him that no amount of money had ever been able to change before. For the first time in years, Malcolm Hayes smiled for real. One afternoon in Chicago, while Malcolm Hayes was standing in the middle of a community event surrounded by families, rebuilt homes, and children who once had no hope for a future, something small happened that shifted the entire atmosphere. A young boy, no older than 10, walked through the crowd slowly, holding onto a worn-out notebook like it was the most important thing he owned. He stopped right in front of Malcolm Hayes, looked up at him with curiosity that came from innocence rather than expectation, and asked a question that seemed simple but carried more weight than anything Malcolm had heard in years. "Mr. Hayes, how did you become successful?" For a moment, everything around them went silent. The noise of the crowd faded. The conversation stopped. Even the movement in the background seemed to pause as if everyone instinctively understood that something important was about to happen. Malcolm Hayes didn't answer immediately. He looked at the young boy. Then he slowly turned his gaze across the neighborhood that once raised him, the same place he had returned to rebuild, the same streets that had shaped both his pain and his ambition. And in that moment, something inside him settled. Because for the first time, success no longer meant what it used to mean. He finally understood that the answer wasn't in his companies, his billions, or the empire he had built. It was standing right in front of him in the lives he was now able to touch. Malcolm Hayes took a breath and knelt slightly to meet the boy at eye level. And then he spoke words that would stay with everyone who heard them long after the moment passed. Real success is not how much money you make. Real success is how many lives become better because you lived. The crowd remained quiet, not because they didn't understand, but because they did. Some nodded slowly. Some lowered their heads. Others simply stood still, processing a truth that felt heavier than anything money could ever measure. And Malcolm Hayes, the man once known only for his wealth, realized something in that moment that changed everything he had ever believed about success, power, and legacy. In that moment, Malcolm Hayes understood something most people never truly come to terms with in their lifetime. Not when they are chasing success. Not when they are building empires. Not even when they finally get everything they once dreamed of as children. You can own everything in the world and still be poor in the things that actually give life meaning. Love, the kind that does not depend on money or status. Time, the kind you cannot buy back once it is gone. Peace, the kind that does not come from achievement, but from acceptance. Connection, the kind that reminds you that you are not meant to walk through life alone. As Malcolm Hayes stood there in the place where his story had come full circle, he was no longer just a billionaire speaking to a crowd. He was a man who had lived both sides of success. The side where everything is gained, and the side where something far more important is slowly lost without you even noticing. And in the silence that followed, the truth settled deeper than any applause ever could. A wealthy pocket, without a loving heart, is still poverty. So here's the question that remains long after Malcolm Hayes stepped away from the crowd in Chicago, long after the silence of that moment faded, and long after the boy's question settled into everyone's memory. Was Malcolm Hayes truly successful, or was he just rich and alone? Because when people looked at his life from the outside, they saw the empire. They saw the billion-dollar companies, the global recognition, the influence, and the respect that followed his name everywhere he went. But when Malcolm Hayes looked at his own life, especially after everything he went through, he saw something very different. He saw the empty table in Atlanta. He saw the unanswered call from Denise Hayes. He saw the years he never got back. And he saw the cost of everything he once thought was worth it. And it raises another question that cannot be ignored. How many people today are chasing money at the cost of their own happiness, believing that success will eventually fix everything, only to realize too late that some things do not return once they are gone? Tell me in the comments what you think about Malcolm Hayes' journey. Do you believe he made the right choice in the end, or do you think he lost too much before he finally understood the truth? And if this story made you think differently about success, money, and what really matters in life, then subscribe for more emotional, true lifestyle documentary stories that reveal what success really costs behind the scenes. Because the next story we will tell is even more painful than this one.